Matthew Lynch, parliamentary Scottish Government, Parliamentary Council Office of the Scottish Government, and I leave the floor to Matthew. Thank you.
Hi, Monica. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, everyone on the call. Let's see if I can share my presentation. Now, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Great. Well, as John mentioned in his chat just there, I'm going to give a little bit of an update and a talk on Lawmaker, the XML-based drafting and publishing tools that we are developing for the UK. I've been at this talk, doing this talk in some shape or form for the past few years, and hopefully each time I've got something new to say, and this time I will, as well as giving a general background for those that are hearing this for the first time. I'll also try and talk a little bit about some of the new things that are happening and some of our recent developments, technology permitting, because I feel I might be cursed by the curse of the demos today. So I was going to give just a bit of a, again, brief background on the project, talk a little bit more about what is Lawmaker and the technology behind it, and then give an update on where we are now, and if time, maybe talk briefly about some of the things that we have learned so far in this interesting adventure that we've been having building this tool. So by way of background, in the UK today, when people access legislation, as John was talking about, they do so online. When they look at the draft legislation as well and the related documents, they tend to go to the Parliament's websites. And so again, they're looking at it online. Within Parliaments, members are increasingly using tablets, other devices to engage in the parliamentary process. And across the board, all the governments in the UK and parliaments and other organisations are committed to a digital first strategy for services. However, all the tools that we use at the moment to produce legislation are fundamentally aimed at the printed page. So in Scotland, they use Microsoft Word to produce their bills. In the UK, they use FrameMaker to produce their bills. And whilst electronic versions are made of those bills, still the tooling is very much focused on producing a print-ready document. And so the real exception in the UK, as we already mentioned, is legislation.gov.uk, which provides that online access to all legislation. So in terms of what Lawmaker is the product of the Legislative Drafting, Amending and Publishing Programme. And this programme was set up to address that issue that I just mentioned, that we need to shift the production of legislation into the digital era to match the dissemination and access to legislation that we already have. But one of the things we wanted to do this time was we wanted to try and do it as a partnership across Parliament and government, and we wanted to really think of legislation as data right from the outset. So some of the key things that we were looking to do were we wanted to treat legislation as data and XML. We wanted to adopt open standards, and that's why we adopted Akoma Ntoso. And we wanted to deliver a shared service. At the moment, there is one tool used in Scotland. There's a different tool used in the UK. There's a different tool used for secondary legislation from primary legislation. So we wanted to build a shared service that could be used by all the different organisations in a single tool. And related to that, we wanted to build browser-based tools, because if you're wanting to deliver a service to users spread across different organisations, and we're talking about eventually 2,500 users spread across tens of different organisations, then you don't want to be deploying desktop-based tools just because of the complications in doing so. From the outset, we focused on building a browser-based tool that could be used by any modern browser. One of the things that we found is that any tool you build is quite demanding of a browser. You've got to assume that users have access to a reasonably modern browser, Chrome or Edge Chromium, or something like that. Otherwise, the tools that we use just won't work. So a little bit more about Lawmaker in terms of technical specs. We built this in the cloud from the get-go. Everything has been hosted in AWS right from the start. Not least because we wanted it to be in the cloud as a scalable, easily deployable application across all the different organizations. We needed, none of the organizations that are partners in this program really wanted to host this system. So again, putting it in the commercial cloud was the natural answer. We have adopted the Oxygen XML web author component as our XML editor, but heavily customized it and integrated it into our tool. We use a NoSQL database called TerraText, produced by Leidos in Australia, to store all of the XML data and to make it searchable, etc. And we use the RenderX PDF renderer to generate print-ready PDFs straight from the XML. And generally, the whole application is front end is built around the React UI. So it's a mix of open source components and proprietary components. Much as we would have perhaps liked to do it all open source, we found that there really wasn't the maturity in the market for the kinds of tools that we wanted, and partly the demands of our users at the time, coming from proprietary tools like FrameMaker and Word. They had very high expectations, and at the time we couldn't find open source tools that we were confident would deliver all of those expectations. But we have used open source tools where possible. In terms of the outputs, Akoma Ntoso XML, unsurprisingly, is one of the key outputs, but it's also the key, it is the fundamental data form throughout the system. The other main output is PDF, because we need to supply the existing print publication processes. And we are looking at making a Word output as well, because users would like an output in Word for sharing with others and things like that. But the key ones for us so far have been making sure we have a good XML output and a PDF output. And we leave it to the partner organizations like the UK Parliament to take the XML and produce HTML on their website as they like to style it. In terms of users, it's quite a wide range of users. We have Parliamentary Council, who are parliamentary drafters based in the Office of Parliamentary Council and the Parliamentary Council Office. That's the UK and the Scottish drafting offices. We have parliamentary clerks in both the UK Parliament and the Scottish Parliament. And we have government lawyers spread across every government department and some non-government departments. And then we have some publishing management staff in the National Archives who handle the management of enacted legislation on legislation.gov. So as I said, up to around 2,500 users when this is fully rolled out. So who's delivering Lawmaker? I mentioned that this is one of the interesting aspects of this is it's a partnership between several different organizations. It's the UK Parliament, the UK Drafting Office, the Scottish Drafting Office, the Scottish Parliament, and the National Archives. So that means it's quite an interesting combination of organisations, including both parliamentary ones and governmental ones, and it's the organisations at a UK level and within one of the devolved parts of the UK, namely Scotland. So that in itself has created an interesting dynamic as we try and balance user needs across all of these different organisations, and that's an ongoing challenge that's never easy to satisfy. Partly to help us deliver this, we have created a project team which is drawn directly from the different partner organisations. So rather than being based in one single organisation, we've drawn resources from all the different organisations to make the most value of having this partnership. And so far, it's worked well, and it has made a lot of progress. So where are we now? So we put out our first public beta in July 2019, which was a very limited beta, which only focused on Scottish legislation, but was functional in that regard. And the first legislation using that was published by September of that year. But as of January 2021, we had rolled Lawmaker out to all of our core user groups, although it's still, user numbers are still rising, and it's still being used alongside the existing tools, so that we can refine it and develop it and make sure it's sufficiently robust to be used in all live circumstances and under pressure, because legislation can be a very demanding and high pressure, tight deadlines, etc. environment. So it's now used to draft Scottish bills and UK bills. It's also used to handle the parliamentary amendment process, to be able to draft Scottish amendments and UK amendments. And I'll try and show, hopefully, if technology is my friend today, I'll try and show a demo of some of the new developments around amendment functionality, in terms of users being able to draft those in line. And it's also being used to draft statutory instruments. That's somewhere where we'll be doing a longer rollout, because most of the users are secondary legislation users. So it will take a while to get the system out to all the users in the different organisations. But we are aiming to be out of beta by the end of this year. So now I'm going to try and give you a little demo of some of the newer features, some of the interesting features that we've been working on. The tool is so large that to give a comprehensive demo of it would take a long time. So I thought it'd be more interesting just to highlight a couple of interesting features of the tool, which in themselves give a bit of a flavour of how it works. So hopefully you can see here, this is just a project page for a demo bill that I created, showing different versions, different working versions there on the left and published versions on the right. But one of the things that I wanted to show first, just because it's partly inspired by some of the presentations at previous Akoma Ntoso summer school events. In particular, I think there was a great presentation by Ashok Hariharan about his work trying to digitize some legislation in his work with parsers and other things. And obviously John was talking as well in his previous presentation about parsing all of these court judgments. So we've been developing a parser of our own for a slightly different purpose, but similar, building on some work that Jim Mangiafico did for us several years ago, which was our users need some way of getting plain and unstructured text into our structured editor. Because as much as we want them to use our editor as the place to draft and generate their legislation, there are times when they will get draft material from other sources that they want to quickly get into Lawmaker, whether they've been emailed some draft text or whether they are taking text that already exists, or for example, some private bills are drafted by outside agents who won't have access to this system. So, so for different uses, we want to have some means of bringing in text from other sources. So I'll just create a new document type. For this, what we built was a parser using Antler to take plain text and generate Akoma Ntoso based on that plain text, and plain text modeled around what we expected UK legislation to look like, and generating the Akoma Ntoso that Lawmaker is expecting. So here you can see I've just, for example, just created an empty bill so that I can demonstrate this feature. What we've done is we've built it as a really as a smart paste feature, so that the users are more or less unaware of what's happening, but if they copy and paste plain text from pretty much any source, Lawmaker will have a go at formatting and structuring it automatically without the user doing any intervention. So just as an easy way to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to use legislation.gov because it's a good source of some legislation text. And so just to demonstrate, I'm just going to select the first part of this act and copy it using Control-C, and then place it into my document, and that's essentially, I just used Control-V and I just pasted that text into Lawmaker, and as you can see there, it's immediately being structured and formatted appropriately, and perhaps, as you can see from the breadcrumb down at the bottom, showing it is actually structured as a properly structured Akoma Ntoso document. So this has become a very quick way for users to bring in content from any source. I'm just using legislation.gov as a quick example, but it could equally be copied from a Word document or just a plain text document. Copying from PDFs can be a little bit difficult because there tends to be extraneous elements in the PDF that tend to end up in your document. But one of the key features we're looking for here is it needs to be good enough. It's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to give the users a quick way to get the content into the system, and then they can correct it. Because as I said, our expectation is that users will use the tool to draft. They will not be drafting on another tool and then importing the content. But there are times when it's useful to be able to do that. And then the other, another thing that I wanted to just demonstrate briefly was we've been working on what we've called inline amending, which is rather than drafting amendments in the traditional form, which in the UK would be something like clause 5, page 6, line 1, leave out, and some text. It's actually to edit a version of the bill using something much more like track changes, and then have the system generate the amendments in the proper form as necessary. So again, inspired by the tools, for example, they've been building at the European Parliament and elsewhere to make the amending process more intuitive for users and members. So I'll just very briefly demonstrate this. So here, what we've done essentially is we've created a new copy of the published bill in this project, and I can now make changes to this bill. You'll see here on the right, there's a little tool panel explaining the options, which are you can insert new content, you can leave out content, or you can substitute content. And these are modeled very much on the available amendments that are allowable in parliamentary procedure. But so, for example, if I wanted to leave out subsection 2, I just select subsection 2 and click leave out. And they're very much in the normal track change style. It now shows as strike through marked out. Equally, if I wanted to add some new text, then I can do it like that, or I can add a new subsection. And as you can see here at the side, there's a panel showing all the amendments that have been made, so the user can jump through them. At the moment, it doesn't show which member is actually proposing these amendments, but that development is coming shortly. I'm just using a development version of the system to show you some of the new features. And so I can create as many of these changes as I want. And then just to demonstrate, and then essentially anytime the document is saved, those amendments are actually automatically translated into the traditional form of UK amendments without the user having to do anything. So when it comes to submitting them to Parliament or producing an official amendment list, that can be done very straightforwardly. So if I just click on view traditional amendments, it's just a very simple example just to show you that. So those track changes have been converted into traditional amendments in the form of clause 1, page 1, line 4, leave out subsection 2, or clause 2, page 1, line 21 at end insert. So this is something that users have been very keen to have the ability to work using this version and then be able to immediately jump to this version and then submit these amendments to Parliament for debate and discussion. And then finally, just the other half of this thing was users have been asking us, once those, if traditional amendments have been created, so I'll just show you this one. Here's just an example document of some users can also draft amendments using the traditional form rather than doing them in line. So they can draft clause 1, page 1, line 4, leave out subsection 2, or clause 2, page 1, leave out children and. So what we've been working on is a tool to take these amendments and then automatically apply them to the bill. So to demonstrate, sure, on the amendment manager, you can see those two amendments are here. And if I select those two amendments and choose apply amendments, I can apply them to a new version of the bill. So this has now created a new version of the bill with those two amendments applied as track changes so that you can check that they've been applied correctly. And there you'll see it. That was one of the amendments was leave out subsection 2, so that's been applied. And the other amendment was leave out children and. So that was just a very quick demonstration of some of the new features that we've been working on in Lawmaker. And just to wind up with a few things that we've learnt so far. One is it's just really important to have a vision of what you're trying to do. This has taken us a long time to get here, and we've had a very clear vision, which has been really useful when times have got hard, because it is really hard. I think anyone that thinks making a XML-based authoring environment for legislation is going to be straightforward is mistaken. Some of the key things we found is expertise is scarce. There are some great people out there, but there are not many of them that have the knowledge you need to build tools like this. It's very difficult to deliver value quickly because systems are so complex. We found that moving to a data paradigm is actually a huge shift for users. And in some ways, we've made the shift easier by making our tools have a very nice user interface. But that has then hidden the fact that underneath things have changed a lot. And that in itself can lead to problems. One of the things we found is we actually need to train our users just a little bit on the basics of XML. Otherwise, they can struggle to shift from, say, Microsoft Word to Lawmaker. And finally, just balancing all the different user groups can be a real challenge. And I know listening to a lot of the projects today, that's kind of a common theme in these types of projects, that there are lots of competing interests for you to balance. But that's the end of my presentation. Very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I open the floor to the questions. So I have a question. Did you encounter some problems for the end users in the user experience, how you are managing the user experience, and if you have a specific group that are designing the interface human-computer interaction?
We've definitely had issues with the user interface. Partly because we've been developing this iteratively. We've been from the beta in July 2019. That's allowed us to get a lot of feedback from the users. So whilst a long time ago we did do some formal user interface design, actually through the National Archives and an agency that they used, we did some formal user interface design, and we're still using some of the outputs from that. A lot of the more recent work has been much more based on feedback, trying out new features, seeing how users respond to them, and then adjusting them accordingly. And that was one of the things that I mentioned was we've tried to give the users an experience that feels like a word processor. But the problem is an XML editor is not a word processor, never can be. And that's because the whole point is you're wanting them to create structure, not just styles and formatting. So as part of our recent training package, we've actually developed a very brief introduction to XML for all users, just to give them the very basics of how XML works and how Akoma Ntoso works. Because when they then approach the tool, they find it much easier to use. And a lot of the users like the tool and how it works. It simplifies a lot of things for them. They don't have to worry about styles and applying the right thing. We've tried to focus on making sure we use the names that the users use. So they insert clauses and schedules. They don't insert P1s or N5s or some other arbitrary language. But it's difficult. All of our users are at least professional users, so we can train them, and it's not like a public tool. But one of our aspirations will be to make this tool available to members of Parliament directly. And when we do that, that will be more of a challenge.
I would also like to ask a question. Yorgos Aristarchos from the European Parliament. When we designed Xenet, which is an editor for Akoma Ntoso, what we wanted is for the users not be able to break the structure. Of course, in the content, we cannot do a linguistic analysis of what they write. I mean, this is artificial intelligence, of course. And we have managed that. So it is impossible in Xenet for the user to create an invalid document. We did that by adding some rules on top of the schema of the XML schema, because the XML schema, I don't know, and this is what I wanted to ask you, is it enough? I see you use a very interesting combination of tools. You didn't want to reinvent the wheel. You used Oxygen XML web editor. So is the schema enough? Because in our case, it was not enough to describe.
No, it's not enough. From early on, we have been using Schematron to apply some additional business rules to make sure that we can actually create valid documents for UK legislation. But at the moment, we're also looking at, and this is another project we're working with the National Archives on, at effectively a subschema of Akoma Ntoso, but written in LEX2021 schema language, which because we need a much more constrained schema that can ensure that the Akoma Ntoso that we produce in Lawmaker can be converted to the Crown markup schema used by legislation.gov.uk. So at the moment we are using Schematron to add those business rules, but we are also now looking at essentially creating a sub-schema.
And did you do an analysis, and this will be enough? Will provide enough constraints for all your types of documents?
That's what we think, but we're expecting that the real world experience will also tell us where we've missed cases, or that there are still gaps. We've always struggled because users have asked for quite a lot of flexibility, but equally from the publication perspective, we need it to be valid and correctly structured.
If we have a bit more time, I would like also to ask another question about the Oxygen XML web editor. What we have seen is our users are quite demanding. In many cases, they want to see the features implemented exactly as they're used to Microsoft Word. So if I right-click there, I want this to happen. If I want to be able to add a new paragraph just by hitting enter, for example, and then split an existing paragraph in two, pretty much how Microsoft Word works, plus other functionalities that they would like. Does the Oxygen XML web editor give you this flexibility in the interface for the editors of your documents?
I think it does, but you have to build, most of those or many of those features yourself. It's very customizable. It's has a very rich API, but if you're wanting to recreate, features that users might have been used to in Word, then you can build all of those features in Oxygen. That's certainly possible. It just takes time.
Thank you. Very, very interesting presentation.